For the last 18 months, livestock disappearances across rural Texas have been getting worse. Not just one or two animals here and there. We're talking about entire herds being picked apart. And the predator doing it isn't anything local ranchers have seen in over a century. It started in Arizona. A rancher named Donald Gray woke up one morning to find 3 of his cattle dead. Not killed for food, not scattered across his property, lined up in a row. Something had taken them down with precision, with intention, and with complete disregard for the fences and gates that were supposed to protect them. Gray has been raising cattle for 42 years. He'd seen mountain lions, javelinas, wild dogs. This was different. This was calculated. Within 3 weeks, reports started coming in from New Mexico, then southern Arizona again. Then, by late 2023, they reached Texas. And when they reached Texas, ranchers realized they were facing something most of them had never prepared for, never trained for, and definitely couldn't afford to lose their livestock to. But here's what most people don't understand. This isn't just a rural crisis. This is an economic catastrophe for people already living on the margins. The average family ranch in Texas operates on margins of less than 8% profit. When you're losing 3, 4, sometimes 5 cattle a week, and each cow costs between $1,200 and $1,800 to replace, you're not just losing animals, you're losing your survival. This is what we're going to explore today. What's moving into Texas, why it's getting worse, and what low-cost defense strategies rural ranchers are using right now to stay alive. If you're living on a tight budget in a rural area, or you know someone who is, this matters more than you think. Because when predators move in, it's never just the animals they take. Subscribe now because this situation is evolving weekly. New sightings are being reported constantly. New strategies are being tested. New costs are hitting ranchers. Over the next year, this is going to affect ranching communities across the entire state. Understanding what's happening now, before it reaches your area, could save you thousands of dollars in preventable losses. Hit subscribe and we'll break down each development as it happens. Let's start with what happened in Arizona. The first documented sighting of what ranchers believe caused the disappearances was in 2021, but the animal had probably been in Arizona for years before that, moving slowly, establishing territory, testing the boundaries of human settlements. Game wardens and ranching communities have been arguing about what it actually is ever since. The official story from Arizona Game and Fish is straightforward. A jaguar had migrated north from Mexico. Not impossible, not unprecedented. Jaguars were historically found throughout the Southwest and into Texas before they were hunted to extinction in the region during the 1800s. But for nearly 150 years, there hadn't been breeding populations north of Mexico. The idea of them returning seemed like folklore. Then came the photographs. Trail cameras set up by ranchers started capturing images of a massive cat, easily 300 pounds or more, with a distinctive spotted coat and bulk that could only be a jaguar. One photo, taken on a ranch 30 miles from the Arizona-Mexico border, showed the animal standing over the carcass of a killed heifer. The rancher who owned that land said it took 3 of their animals that night, 3 in 8 hours. Local news stations initially treated it like a curiosity, a big cat returning to its ancestral homeland. National Geographic angles, human interest stories about wildlife making comebacks, but the ranchers themselves knew better. This wasn't a nature documentary. This was an economic emergency. One Arizona rancher, Maria Hernandez, who operates a smaller operation on inherited land with her 2 adult sons, described what it was like to lose 8 animals over 2 weeks. She said the fear was worse than the financial hit. Not knowing where the predator was, waking up in the middle of the night thinking you heard something, checking the perimeter of your fences constantly. She had to hire someone to watch the cattle at night. That cost money she didn't have. She started bringing the younger cattle closer to the house at night. That created different problems. It disrupted breeding cycles. The animals got stressed. Production went down. Maria is not alone, and her story is important because it illustrates something most people outside of ranching don't understand. When you operate on thin margins, you can't just absorb losses. One bad season isn't a learning experience. It's a threat to your family's survival. By 2022, jaguars had been spotted in New Mexico twice. Then Arizona had a second sighting. Game and Fish released official guidance. Ranchers were told to reinforce their fences, install motion sensor lights, bring cattle to night enclosures, and hire guards if possible. For wealthy ranchers, this was annoying. For family operations on tight budgets, this was impossible. And then something changed. The jaguar, or possibly a second jaguar, or possibly multiple animals, moved. They started ranging further north. Sightings moved from the Arizona-Mexico border region toward the central Arizona highlands. Then they jumped to New Mexico. Then, in late 2023, the first documented attack happened in Texas. The Texas attacks were different from Arizona. More aggressive, more frequent, less cautious. Whatever caution the animal or animals had shown in Arizona seemed to evaporate once they crossed into Texas. The first rancher hit was James Whitmore, who operates a mid-size cattle operation about 90 miles northeast of the Arizona border. He lost 4 animals in 3 days. He didn't see the predator. He just found the remains. The kills were clean, professional, efficient. The animal or animals knew how to take down cattle without wasting energy, without making mistakes. Whitmore called the Texas Parks and Wildlife Department. They sent out a wildlife officer who examined the kill sites. The officer's assessment was cautious. Could be a jaguar, could be a very large mountain lion. Hard to tell without more evidence. But based on the kill patterns, the size of the prey being taken, the boldness of the attack, the wildlife officer leaned toward jaguar. That assessment would change everything for Texas ranchers. Within weeks, more reports came in. A ranch near Fort Davis lost 9 cattle over 2 weeks. Another near Marfa lost cattle and a horse. Then a rancher outside of Alpine reported seeing the animal itself. He described it as absolutely massive, with distinctive spotted markings, moving with an unhurried confidence like it owned the land. By the time Texas Parks and Wildlife issued an official statement, the damage was already spreading. They confirmed it was likely a jaguar, that it had migrated north from Mexico, that it was not a normal occurrence but also not an unprecedented one, and that ranchers should take precautions. Take precautions. As if the ranchers didn't already know they needed to take precautions. As if taking precautions was actually affordable for people living on $5,000 a year in profit margins. That's when things got desperate. The economic impact on Texas ranchers started slowly and then accelerated. By mid-2024, insurance companies started getting overwhelmed with claims. Many ranchers, especially the smaller operations, don't carry livestock insurance. The premiums are too high, the deductibles are too aggressive, so losses come straight out of pocket. A rancher named Robert Chen, who manages about 80 head of cattle on family land that's been in his family for 4 generations, told me what it felt like to lose 6 animals in 1 week. Each animal represented roughly $1,500 in direct replacement cost. But that didn't account for the value they would have produced. That breeding heifer was supposed to produce calves. That bull was supposed to service 15 cows. The loss wasn't just the animal, it was the production they would have contributed for years. Robert did the math. Losing 6 animals in 1 week meant he'd need to increase his beef sales by at least $8,000 just to break even for that month. In ranching, you can't just produce more beef on demand. You need more animals. You need more feed. You need more time. Everything compounds. And here's where it gets critical for understanding why this is a low-cost living crisis. When you're operating on thin margins, you can't absorb shocks. A wealthy ranching corporation can lose 100 animals and adjust quarterly projections. A family operation loses 6 and you're looking at selling land, cutting staff, or going into debt you might not recover from. Robert ended up doing something more, and more ranchers are doing. He mortgaged his family land to pay for predator defense infrastructure. He installed electric fencing in sections. He hired 2 part-time workers to rotate night watches. He bought motion sensor lights and installed them around the main holding pens. The total cost was around $7,000. That's money he has to earn back before the year ends, just to stay even. And he's one of the lucky ones. He has land to mortgage. Many ranchers don't. The low-cost defense strategies that ranchers have started using are a combination of desperation and ingenuity. Because when you can't afford the professional solutions, you get creative. The first strategy is called the guardian animal approach. You can't necessarily stop a jaguar, but you can make it harder to get to your cattle. Some ranchers are using livestock guardian dogs, specifically the larger breeds like Anatolian Shepherds and Great Pyrenees. These dogs are bred specifically to protect livestock. A single dog costs between $200 and $500. You might need 3 or 4. That's $2,000 in upfront cost. But if it prevents even a few losses, it pays for itself quickly. The problem is that a jaguar is not a normal predator. It's not a coyote or a wild dog that gets scared by aggressive barking. Early reports from ranchers using guardian dogs showed mixed results. Some dogs scared off the predator. Others were killed by it. One rancher reported finding his 2-year-old Great Pyrenees dead, killed by what appeared to be the jaguar. The dog had tried to protect the cattle and lost. For that rancher, the investment didn't just fail. It added emotional trauma to the financial loss. But most ranchers keep using the dogs because they still believe it helps, and because the alternatives are worse. There's also emerging evidence that multiple guardian dogs working together are more effective than a single dog. So some ranchers are buying 2 or 3 dogs, spreading the cost, and seeing better results. Strategy. The second strategy is rotational grazing and night enclosures. Instead of letting cattle graze freely across open pasture, ranchers are keeping them in smaller, more defensible areas at night. This requires better infrastructure, stronger fencing, and more labor to rotate animals, but it significantly reduces the window of vulnerability. A jaguar is bold, but it still prefers to hunt under cover of darkness. If your cattle are in a reinforced pen with good lighting, the predator has to make a choice to attack fortified animals instead of finding easier prey elsewhere. The cost of implementing rotational grazing with night enclosures varies, but for a small operation, you're looking at somewhere between $3,000 and $8,000 in fencing, lights, and gates. For a family operation with less than 100 head of cattle and limited cash flow, this is a significant investment, but again, it's cheaper than the ongoing losses. Many ranchers are doing this in phases, starting with their most valuable breeding stock. The third strategy is perimeter security on a budget. Motion sensor lights are relatively cheap, somewhere between $50 and $300 depending on the quality. Solar-powered ones are even cheaper. The theory is simple. Most predators prefer to hunt in darkness. If you flood your grazing areas with light when motion is detected, the predator gets spooked and moves on. Does it work? Partially. Some ranchers report it's effective. Others say the jaguar seems unbothered by the lights. One rancher told me that after 3 weeks of motion sensor lights, the predator started attacking in the middle of the day. It was like the animal learned when the lights were coming and just changed its schedule. That's the terrifying part of dealing with a jaguar. It's not just a predator, it's an intelligent predator that learns from human countermeasures. Some ranchers are now adding random patterns to their lighting systems, using unpredictable schedules instead of consistent ones. Whether this actually works or is just security theater, nobody knows yet. The fourth strategy is community coordination. Ranchers are starting to share information about sightings, kill locations, and predator movements through informal networks. Facebook groups dedicated to jaguar sightings have thousands of members. Ranchers post photos, locations, descriptions. The idea is that if everyone knows where the predator is, everyone can prepare. Some counties are organizing coordinated night watches, where ranchers take shifts monitoring their properties and alerting neighbors if they see the animal. This is effectively free. It just requires communication and coordination. But it also requires time. And time is something ranchers on thin budgets can't spare. One county coordinator told me that organizing these watches, scheduling people, maintaining communication networks, and responding to false alarms is basically a full-time job that nobody is being paid to do. The fifth and most drastic strategy is culling. Some ranchers, frustrated by losses and exhausted by constant vigilance, have decided that the only solution is to hunt and kill the predator themselves. This is technically illegal without a permit, but enforcement is difficult. Ranchers are arming themselves, setting up hunting stands, and waiting. Multiple reports have come in of ranchers shooting at large cats in the dark. At least one rancher accidentally killed what he thought was the jaguar, but turned out to be a large mountain lion. Another injured something in the brush, but it escaped. No confirmed kills have been reported, but the attempts are increasing. And the risk of an accident, or someone shooting an animal that isn't the predator, or the predator fighting back with lethal results, is becoming real. I spoke with Dr. Rebecca Gutierrez, a wildlife ecologist who studies large predator behavior and migration patterns at the University of Arizona. She provided perspective on what's actually happening and why it matters for understanding the bigger picture. According to Dr. Gutierrez, jaguars are not actually that rare in Mexico. Their numbers have been recovering slowly over the past 2 decades due to conservation efforts in Mexico and Central America. There's a breeding population of somewhere between 150 and 200 animals across Mexico, Central America, and northern South America. The animals are expanding their range as their population grows. They're looking for new territory, new resources, new areas to establish themselves. The migration into Arizona, and now Texas, is not an anomaly. It's a predictable result of a recovering species expanding north. Dr. Gutierrez expects more jaguars to cross the border over the next 5 to 10 years. She said it with the calm certainty of someone who's read the ecological data and understands what demographic recovery looks like. She wasn't excited about it. She wasn't scared. She was just stating facts. I asked her about the agricultural impact on ranchers. She acknowledged it's real, but she put it in perspective. She said jaguars are actually fairly selective hunters. They're not going to kill indiscriminately. They're going to focus on easier prey, which means they're more likely to go after cattle than wild animals when they're in agricultural areas. But the total number of predations is still relatively small compared to other threats to ranchers. She's right about that statistically, but statistics don't pay for a dead cow. Statistics don't pay for the mortgage on land that's just been threatened. Statistics don't feed a family when the operation that's been in your family for 4 generations just lost its profit margin for the quarter. Dr. Gutierrez also explained that the animal is unlikely to become established permanently in Texas. The habitat is suboptimal. The prey base isn't ideal for a large cat predator. Jaguars prefer dense jungle and scrub. Texas is more open, more developed in many areas, less conducive to a top predator, maintaining sustainable populations. They'll continue to pass through, possibly establish temporary territory in the most remote areas. But a breeding population in Texas is very unlikely in the near term. That's actually the good news. The predator moving into Texas isn't going to be here forever. It's just passing through, hunting as it goes, disrupting ranching operations as it passes. The bad news is that we don't know how long it will stay. The movement patterns of the jaguar or jaguars in Texas are becoming clearer as more reports come in and wildlife agencies work to track the animals. Based on sighting locations, kill sites, and camera trap data compiled by Texas Parks and Wildlife and volunteer citizen scientists, it appears there are at least 2 animals, possibly 3, moving through West Texas and Southwest Texas. They seem to be moving generally northward and eastward, following water sources and areas with livestock concentrations. One animal was last spotted near Pecos County, moving toward the direction of Odessa and Midland. Another was spotted near Brewster County, moving north along the Rio Grande. The movement pattern suggests the animals are following the riverbeds and creek systems that provide water and game during a dry season. Unfortunately, these water sources also run through prime ranching country, some of the most productive cattle regions in Texas. Based on the current pace of movement and the seasonal patterns observed, if the trend continues at its current rate, the jaguar could reach the central Texas plateau within the next 6 to 9 months. Beyond that, North Texas and East Texas, which have significant cattle operations and multiple competing ranching regions, could be affected within 2 years. This is not a prediction that's certain. Predator movements are unpredictable, and animals change behavior based on resource availability and human pressure. But based on current trajectory and historical patterns from other large predators, that's where the data points. The implications for ranchers across the state are serious and wide-ranging. Central Texas has enormous cattle operations, some of the most valuable ranches in the country, but they're mixed in with thousands of small family operations that don't have the resources to implement the kind of predator defense strategies that larger corporations can afford. If the jaguar reaches those areas, the economic disruption could affect thousands of families. So what comes next? How do ranchers prepare? What should they actually be doing right now? The first step is awareness. You need to know if there have been sightings in your area. You need to be monitoring local agricultural extension offices and wildlife agency announcements. You need to be part of the community networks sharing information. Facebook groups dedicated to this issue exist. County extension offices have information. State wildlife agencies are publishing updates. Get informed now, before the predator reaches your area. The second step is gradual infrastructure improvement. If you're not already doing it, start moving toward better fencing, night enclosures, and motion sensor lighting, but do it gradually if you need to. You don't need to implement everything at once. Start with motion sensor lights around your main holding pens. That's the cheapest investment with reasonable returns. Then improve your fencing to make it more predator resistant. Then consider night enclosures and guardian animals. Spread the cost over several months or a year if you need to. This approach lets you test what works for your specific situation without blowing your annual budget on a single defense strategy. The third step is insurance and documentation. If you don't already have livestock insurance, talk to your agent about what's available. It's expensive, and many small operations can't afford it, but get quotes anyway. Understand what's covered and what isn't. Some policies might cover predation, others won't. You need to know, and start documenting any losses you experience. Photographs, receipts, records, veterinary reports. If there's any government compensation or assistance program that develops, you'll need documentation to apply. The fourth step is community engagement. Connect with neighboring ranchers. Share information about predator movements. Organize coordinated watches if possible. Talk to your county extension office about hosting educational sessions on predator defense strategies. Texas A&M has resources on this. Use them. Get knowledge that's specifically tailored to your area and situation. The fifth step is honest assessment of your situation. If you're already operating on extremely thin margins and losing even a few animals would threaten your survival, you need to think about whether you're positioned well enough to weather this threat. This might mean diversifying your operation, adding value-added products like cheese, jerky, or other processed goods that generate more revenue per animal. It might mean looking at agritourism or other revenue sources. It might mean having a serious conversation with your family about the viability of continuing if losses become severe. This is not a recommendation to sell or give up. This is a recommendation to be realistic about your situation and have a plan if things get worse. There's also a bigger picture here that's worth examining. This jaguar crisis is a symptom of something larger. Climate change is altering wildlife habitats. Predator populations that were suppressed for over a century are now recovering, and human agricultural zones are expanding into areas that used to be pure wildlife habitat. We're creating overlap zones where conflict is inevitable. The ranching community doesn't control these forces. They're experiencing the consequences, and the burden of adaptation is falling almost entirely on them. Some animal rights organizations have called for ranchers to adapt their practices to accommodate the returning predators. Suggestions include switching away from cattle to crops, or accepting predation as a cost of coexisting with wildlife. These suggestions come from people who are not risking their family's financial survival. To a rancher who's already operating on 5% margins and can't afford to lose livestock, these suggestions sound like they're being asked to destroy their livelihood for the benefit of ideology. There's got to be a better path forward, one that acknowledges both the legitimate needs of ranchers trying to survive and the legitimate ecological importance of protecting predator species that were hunted to near extinction. That path might include government assistance programs for ranchers dealing with predation losses. It might include coordinated wildlife management at regional levels instead of state levels. It might include tax incentives for ranchers who implement predator-friendly practices. It might include predator insurance pools, where risk is shared across the agricultural community instead of just borne by individuals. None of these solutions exist yet. Right now, ranchers are on their own. The jaguar moving into Texas is a marker of a changing world. Wildlife is returning, ecosystems are shifting, and rural communities that depend on agriculture are adapting in real time, often without support, often at tremendous cost. For low-cost ranchers specifically, the jaguar crisis is another stress on an already stressed system. It's another cost, another reason to diversify, another reason to think hard about the future of family ranching in a climate and wildlife situation that's different from anything most ranchers have experienced before. But it's also worth noting that ranchers have always been adaptable. They survive on creativity, on toughness, on the willingness to solve problems with limited resources. The ranchers I've spoken with aren't giving up. They're implementing new strategies. They're learning. They're sharing information. They're preparing. That adaptability might be the most valuable resource they have right now. If you're a rancher dealing with this threat, or if you're supporting ranchers in your community, there are immediate steps you can take. First, connect with Texas Parks and Wildlife Department and your county agricultural extension office. They have resources and current information. Second, join local ranching networks and online communities where real-time sightings and strategies are being shared. Third, assess your current infrastructure and make a plan for gradual improvements if needed. Fourth, look into insurance options and financial assistance programs. Fifth, document everything if you experience losses. This is a real threat that's going to get worse before it gets better. But with preparation, community coordination, and practical strategies, ranchers can protect their operations and their livelihoods. The jaguar won't be in Texas forever, but for the next few years, it's going to be part of the ranching reality. Know your threat, know your region, know your resources, and know that you're not alone in facing this challenge. If you found this breakdown helpful, subscribe for deep dives into emerging crises affecting rural communities and low-cost living situations. Next week, we're breaking down the economics of drought-resistant crops and how ranchers are adapting their operations to climate shifts. You're going to see why crop diversification isn't just a nice idea. It's becoming a survival strategy for operations on thin margins. Click that video when you're ready to dive into it. I'll see you out there.